He was left to die, chained to a frozen pine tree, scarred, starving, his once proud eyes clouded with pain. No food, no warmth, no name, just the howling wind and the silence of betrayal. No one came, until an 8-year-old boy with a heart too big for this world wandered off the path and changed everything. What he found wasn't just a dog. It was a soldier, a survivor, a living link to a father he thought he'd lost forever. What happened next will melt your heart and restore your faith in second chances. Before we start, tell me where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe in second chances, if you believe animals deserve love, not pain, hit that subscribe button because what you're about to hear will stay with you forever. The snow had started early that year in Silver Pines, a mountain town tucked deep in the Colorado wilderness, where the pines stood like sentinels and the wind spoke in low, sorrowful hums. December brought with it a kind of silence that felt too heavy for a place so small. Icy gusts crept through the narrow streets, curling around wooden cabins and biting through coats no matter how thick. The sky, a pale slate gray, hovered oppressively low. In the Carter household, tucked on the edge of the forest line, the silence was even heavier inside than out. Noah Carter sat alone on the school bus, his knees pulled up onto the seat, his red flannel shirt half-buttoned over a thermal undershirt that didn't quite reach his wrists. At 8 years old, Noah had the slender frame of a child who'd grown taller without realizing it, a mop of chestnut hair that stuck out under his knit beanie, and large hazel eyes dulled by months of grief. He didn't speak much, especially not since his father died earlier that year in a search and rescue accident. Since then, words had become fragile things, too easily broken. When the bus halted near the town's ranger outpost, Noah didn't wait. He slipped out to the back emergency door while the driver was distracted with the rowdy kids up front. His boots crunched on the frostbitten gravel as he made his way down a trail veiled in light snow. He had no plan, just a pull in his chest that urged him to go, to walk somewhere the world couldn't find him. Further down the trail, as he passed the place where the forest thickened and the air grew quiet with falling snow, he paused. Something faint, carried through the cold. A bark, weak, strained. Then another. His heart quickened. It wasn't the bark of a wild animal. It was asking. Noah stepped off the trail and moved cautiously toward the sound, weaving between towering pines, their boughs drooping under the weight of fresh snow. The forest was nearly silent, but for the rhythmic creak of frozen branches and that thin, desperate sound. He crept closer to where a large pine had split in a storm, the trunk half fallen and dusted with powder, and there, in the hollow of its shelter, was the shape of a dog, a German shepherd, large, muscular, but clearly gaunt now, its ribs faintly visible beneath matted black and tan fur. Snow clung to its muzzle, and one ear was bloodied and limp. Around its neck and chest, a heavy iron chain was looped twice around the base of the pine, pinning the dog in place. The chain had rubbed raw into the fur, exposing scabbed skin beneath. The dog lifted its head weakly as Noah stepped closer, but didn't bark again. It didn't have the strength. The dog's eyes met Noah's, golden, clouded with exhaustion but not fear. There was something deeper there, trust, or maybe a plea. Noah crouched slowly, barely breathing. "Hey," he whispered, reaching out with trembling fingers. The dog didn't flinch, only watched. Its breathing was shallow, each exhale forming thin steam in the cold. Noah tried to tug at the chain, but it didn't budge. He looked around frantically for something, anything, but all he had was a half-eaten granola bar in his coat pocket and a handful of twigs. The dog made a soft sound, more of a sigh than a whine. Noah knelt in the snow beside it. "I'll come back," he said, pressing a mittened hand against its side. "I promise." He stood and bolted through the woods, back the way he came, tripping once over a root and scraping his palm. He didn't stop. He burst through the back gate of the Carter property and ran straight to the old tool shed behind the barn. His grandfather, Walter Carter, stood inside, organizing rusted equipment along the pegboard wall. Walter was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 70s, with a full head of gray hair and a face like weathered stone. He wore a plaid coat that had seen decades of mountain winters and a pair of thick leather gloves. A former forest ranger with over 30 years in the service, Walter was a man who didn't smile often, but when he did, it meant something. Noah burst in, panting. "Grandpa, I need you. There's a dog. He's hurt, chained to a tree." Walter turned, his brows drawn together in concern but not disbelief. He didn't ask how Noah found it. He simply picked up a heavy pair of bolt cutters from the workbench. "Lead the way." They trudged back through the snow together, Walter's breath misting beside him as he followed Noah through the narrow trail. The boy spoke little, but his urgency said enough. When they reached the dog, Walter paused. He knelt slowly, examining the chain, the positioning, the eyes of the animal that hadn't even barked. "He's a canine," he said softly, brushing snow off the dog's collarless neck. "You can tell by how he's waiting." Walter lifted the bolt cutters, positioned them carefully on the link, and with a grunt and one powerful squeeze, the chain snapped. The dog didn't move right away. Walter placed a steady hand on its shoulder. "Take it slow, boy. You're free now." The German shepherd staggered up, legs trembling, and took 2 steps forward before slumping into Noah's side. The boy wrapped his arms around its neck without hesitation. "We'll call him Kodiak," Noah said quietly. "That was Dad's favorite bear." Walter nodded once. "Fitting." As they made their way home through the snow, Walter cast one more glance at the tree. Something about the scene unsettled him, not just the cruelty of it, but the placement, the type of chain, the silence. It wasn't the work of some careless hunter. It was planned. Back at the house, Lisa Carter, Noah's mother, was returning from a long shift at the Silver Pines Clinic. Lisa was in her late 30s, with dark auburn hair usually pulled back in a loose ponytail, tall and lean from years of both motherhood and medical work. Her face carried the softness of someone kind, but her eyes, a warm brown, often looked too tired. Losing her husband had hollowed something inside her, and the long shifts at the clinic didn't help her reconnect with her son. She stepped out of her car and paused at the sight of Noah guiding the injured dog toward the porch. Her lips parted slightly. "Noah? What is that?" Walter emerged behind him. "Rescue," he said simply. "He found him." Lisa knelt beside the dog, her nurse instincts overriding her shock. "He's freezing. We need to get him warm, fast." As she placed her hands gently along the dog's flank, she paused. "There's a scar here, deep one. This wasn't from today." She glanced at Walter. "This dog's seen things." Walter's gaze didn't leave Kodiak. "So has Noah." They carried Kodiak inside, wrapped him in towels, and settled him beside the fireplace. Noah stayed by his side until long past dark, his hand never leaving the dog's fur. For the first time in months, he didn't feel alone. The fire crackled softly in the hearth of the Carter living room as snow continued to drift past the frosted windows outside. Night had settled firmly over Silver Pines, pressing silence into every crevice of the town like a thick woolen blanket. Inside, however, a quiet energy stirred. Kodiak lay on an old patchwork blanket near the fireplace, his large frame curled in cautious rest. His tan and black coat was still damp from the snow, and his breathing came slow and steady, though now deeper than when Noah first found him. A fresh bandage crossed his foreleg and a second wrapped just above his ribs applied with gentle, practiced hands by Lisa Carter. Lisa sat cross-legged beside him, a small medical kit open on the floor. In her mid-30s, Lisa had the kind of grace forged through endurance, tall, slender, and often in scrubs or denim with auburn hair she rarely had time to style. Her brown eyes, tired yet attentive, scanned the dog's body for further wounds. She had worked in trauma triage during her internship years in Denver, but tonight, for the first time in a long time, her hands trembled not from uncertainty but from fear that something fragile might break again in her son. Noah sat only inches away. His knees hugged to his chest. He had taken off his boots but not his coat, as if he might need to run out again at any moment. He watched Kodiak with the reverence one might reserve for a returned soldier. His fingers brushed gently through the dog's coarse fur, avoiding the bandages. "He hasn't growled once," Lisa murmured, mostly to herself. "That's not normal. He's injured cold in pain. And yet he's calm." Walter Carter leaned against the doorway, arms folded. His frame cast a long shadow across the room. "It's more than calm," he said. "He's alert. Watch his ears." Every time the house creaks, he shifts toward the sound. Lisa looked up. "You think he's military?" Walter stepped closer and knelt stiffly, placing one hand flat beside the dog's paw. Kodiak opened one eye and met the man's gaze, measured, unwavering, unafraid. "I think," Walter said slowly, "this dog has seen more than most of us." It was Noah who spoke next, his voice soft but certain. "Can he stay?" Lisa hesitated. "Honey, we don't know where he came from. There could be a report out of search." "There isn't." Walter cut in. "I'll call Mason tomorrow, check the recent reports. But if this dog was part of an active unit, someone should have come looking by now. The fact that he didn't have a tag or chip concerns me more than if he did." Lisa sighed. "At least until he heals." She looked at Noah. "But not in your room, and not in here." Noah's face dimmed slightly, but Walter interjected. "What about the shed?" Lisa turned to him. "The old one. It's full of gear and probably has mice. I'll help him clean it out," Walter said. "The boy needs purpose. And that dog, he needs distance. Animals like him don't heal well in living rooms." The next morning, under a pale sun and a sky still brimming with snow clouds, Noah and Walter set to work. The shed, tucked at the back of their property near the tree line, had once been used by David Carter Noah's late father for field prep and map-making. The inside was cluttered with old camping gear, faded maps, climbing rope lanterns, and forgotten flannel jackets that still smelled faintly of pine. Noah swept the floor while Walter reinforced the door hinges. They set down a thick wool blanket, dragged in an old sleeping bag for Noah to sit on, and carried in a shallow dish of water and some cooked chicken Lisa had set aside. Kodiak followed slowly, his movements cautious but steady, nose twitching at familiar scents. In the back corner of the shed, Noah found a weathered metal box labeled Field Logs. He unlatched the rusted clips and flipped through a handful of notebooks until one caught his eye. Brown leather, the name David Carter embossed faintly in the corner. He opened it carefully. Inside, his father's handwriting, steady and blocky, filled page after page with entries on weather trail conditions, wildlife sightings, and once mid-page a small note. Training with K9 Sergeant Kodiak. Excellent tracking. Needs patience work. Responds best to quiet tone and hand signals. Saved us an hour today by picking up the elk trail. Noah froze. His thumb pressed against the corner of the page as he looked up at Kodiak, who had settled in the middle of the shed and was now watching him quietly. "You knew my dad?" Noah whispered. Walter entered, dusting snow from his shoulders. "Find something." Noah turned the journal toward him. "Look." Walter squinted, adjusted his glasses, and read the note. His brows knit. "Well, I'll be damned." He wrote about Kodiak. This Kodiak. He called him Sergeant. Walter sank onto a wooden crate, his eyes scanning the dog with new gravity. That's not a name you give lightly. If this is the same dog, then someone's lying about where he ended up. Noah sat next to Kodiak, pressing his side gently into the dog's chest. "He's not just some stray," he said. "He came back for a reason." Later that afternoon, Lisa stepped into the shed with a thermos of warm broth and a plate of biscuits. She paused at the threshold, taking in the sight, her son curled up beside a wounded dog, the journal of her late husband open between them. Lisa placed the food down, then knelt by Kodiak. The dog didn't flinch. He leaned into her touch slightly. "You knew David, didn't you?" she said quietly. "I can see it." Outside, the wind began to rise again, carrying whispers through the trees. But inside the shed, a warmth had begun to take hold. Not just from blankets or broth, but from memory presence and a connection that couldn't be explained. Kodiak closed his eyes for the first time since arriving, and Noah, watching him, smiled a small smile, but real. The snow outside had crusted over with a thin layer of ice, sparkling beneath the late morning sun like frosted glass. In Silver Pines, winter had a way of painting over everything with beauty, even the things best left hidden. Inside the shed behind the Carter property, Kodiak shifted on his blanket as Lisa knelt beside him, her breath forming soft clouds in the cold air. She had brought a flashlight, a stethoscope, and a satchel with antiseptic and gauze, but it wasn't the fresh wound on his leg that caught her attention. It was the scar on his left shoulder, an incision faint but precise, running parallel to the muscle, cleanly healed, yet unmistakable. Lisa gently brushed the fur aside and narrowed her eyes. "That's a surgical line," she murmured. "Not an injury. This was done intentionally." Kodiak didn't move. He simply looked at her steady and calm. She glanced over her shoulder where Noah sat hunched over the open journal of his father. "Honey," she said, "I think this dog had a chip. One that was removed." Noah looked up. "What does that mean?" Lisa hesitated. "It means someone didn't want him to be traced." Lisa Carter had once worked under a trauma unit near Fort Carson, where she had occasionally assisted with canine therapy programs. She knew what a canine insertion scar looked like. This one was identical. Later that afternoon, while Lisa returned to the clinic for her shift, Noah stayed behind in the shed with Kodiak. He waited until Walter was chopping wood near the barn and then slipped back into the house. He knew his mother's laptop password. It was her old badge number from the hospital. He logged in and sat cross-legged on the living room rug, Kodiak's name echoing in his head. He didn't know where to start, so he typed Sergeant Kodiak K9 Unit Denver. The search results were sparse at first. Articles about dog training police units and a local canine fundraiser. But on the second page, a small headline caught his eye: "Missing in action, tactical canine vanishes during operation." He clicked it. The article, dated 2 years ago, featured a grainy photo of a younger German Shepherd in uniform, ears, sharp stance, rigid. His fur was darker back then and the eyes were clearer, but Noah knew without question it was Kodiak. The article said the dog had gone missing during a covert operation near Pike National Forest just days after his handler was killed in the line of duty. The dog's body was never recovered. No official explanation was given, and no follow-up reports had been published. The department had quietly declared him presumed lost. Noah stared at the screen. His fingers trembled as he wrote the name down on a scrap of notebook paper: Sergeant Kodiak Unit Echo Missing. He whispered, "They left you behind." That evening, Lisa returned home to find Noah waiting in the kitchen with the printed article in hand. She read it in silence, eyes scanning each line, the crease in her brow deepening. "This confirms what I saw," she said, lowering the paper. "He was trained, and if he was declared lost in action, someone may have tried to erase him." Walter entered moments later, brushing snow from his sleeves. He noticed their expressions. "Something wrong," Lisa handed him the printout. Kodiak wasn't just a stray. He was part of a Denver tactical unit. Officially, he died in an op. Walter's jaw tightened, but he didn't. Noah looked between them. "What do we do now?" Walter nodded slowly. "We keep him safe. Whoever wanted him gone may not know he's alive. Let's keep it that way." Meanwhile, across town at the sheriff's office, a community meeting was being held in the cramped town hall. Sheriff Mason Reeves stood at the front, a man in his early 60s with salt and pepper hair and the stoic calm of someone who'd lived through more winters than most would care to count. Broad-chested and with hands that still looked like they could split wood bare-fisted, he commanded quiet without asking for it. Mason tapped a finger on the edge of the podium. "We've had 3 separate reports in the past 2 weeks," he said. "Tracks in the North Woods, no vehicle nearby, no hikers logged in or out, just someone walking in circles too far from the trails." A murmur passed through the room. Farmers, shop owners, teachers, all bundled in layers, many with boots still dusted in snow. Mason raised a hand. "Now, I'm not saying it's dangerous yet, but I want you all to keep eyes open. Anyone you don't recognize, you report, and don't go into the forest alone, especially north of the ridge." One of the women near the back raised a hand. Tall and thin, with silver-streaked hair tucked under a beanie, her name was Judith Marlowe, a librarian who also ran the community watch. "Has anyone checked the old fire road beyond Dry Creek?" she asked. It's not on the official trail maps anymore. Mason nodded. We will, but if anyone's moving out there, they're being careful. No litter, no smoke, no campfires. His voice hardened slightly. This isn't the work of lost hikers. When the meeting dispersed, Mason lingered. He rubbed the back of his neck as he reviewed the tracks again on his printed report boot treads, not deep enough to be heavy but large enough to be adult male. The direction of movement south, toward the Carter property line. Back at home, Noah had returned to the shed carrying an old flashlight and a packet of jerky he'd saved from lunch. Kodiak greeted him with a slow rise and a single thump of his tail. I found your story, Noah said softly, sitting cross-legged beside him. And I think you knew my dad. Kodiak tilted his head slightly, ears lifting as if in recognition of the name. Noah reached out and placed the paper clipping gently beside the dog. You didn't die, he whispered. They just forgot you, but I won't. Kodiak leaned forward and pressed his forehead gently to the boy's shoulder. Outside, the wind shifted. The forest exhaled. Somewhere far beyond the ridgeline, boot tracks faded with fresh snowfall. But in the small wooden shed behind the Carter home, a bond was forming, one stitched not from ownership, but remembrance. And neither of them would forget. The wind had dropped overnight, but the cold remained sharp and unforgiving beneath a pale white sky. In Silver Pines, the pines stood silent, cloaked in hoarfrost, their boughs whispering above narrow game trails cut long ago and half swallowed by the ever-shifting forest. Walter Carter stood at the edge of the tree line, his breath pluming in the frigid air, one hand resting on the wooden stock of the walking stick he always carried when heading into the backcountry. Beside him, Noah adjusted his oversized coat, the sleeves rolled up twice and still grazing his knuckles. We shouldn't go too far, Noah said, glancing behind them. What if Mom notices? She won't. Walter replied, his voice low and steady. I told her we're clearing the snowdrift by the old fence. We'll be back before noon. He nodded to the narrow path ahead where deer tracks overlapped with something stranger, boot prints, fresh and human. The forest absorbed sound. Their footsteps in the snow made no more than the crunch of distant paper. Walter moved with a kind of quiet familiarity, as if he were returning to a place he'd tried to forget. He had changed from the plaid jacket he wore around town to a dark canvas coat faded at the shoulders and wore thick leather gloves that bore the burnished creases of long use. The trail narrowed between thickets of dogwood and spruce. Walter paused occasionally to check the prints, long strides flat, heel pattern, someone carrying weight but trained not to drag their feet. Noah followed silently, Kodiak close to his side. The German shepherd's ears remained perked, his nose lifting now and then to test the air. His limp was nearly gone, but the scar above his ribs was still visible beneath his winter-thickened coat. Walter slowed and pointed toward a slope half-shrouded in evergreens. There. Up the hill, mostly hidden by brush and snow, stood a small cabin, weather-beaten, single-roomed, and hunched like a forgotten memory. The boards were grayed with age, the windows dark. A rusted stovepipe jutted from the roof, long since cold. Noah's heart beat faster as they approached. Inside, the air was still and brittle. Broken crates lined the back wall. A torn tarp lay in the corner, stained and frozen into the floor. Kodiak sniffed along the baseboards, his body stiffening near the far wall. Noah followed him, crouching as his fingers brushed the floor. His hand touched something cold metal. He pulled it free from a drift of straw and debris. It was half a collar. Thick nylon, faded black with a clasp bent from tension. The metal tag, dulled with age, bore a single line of worn engraving, K9 Unit Echo. Walter stepped over and took it in his gloved hands. Echo Unit, he whispered. This proves it. Noah looked up. Proves what Walter let out a breath through his nose. That Kodiak was here, held here, and that whoever left him didn't expect him to be found. The boy's fingers tightened around the fabric. Why would anyone do that? Walter turned away, his voice graver than before. You remember how I said I was forced into retirement? Noah nodded. It wasn't just age. Walter continued. 10 years ago, I stood in front of the county board and fought against the new development permits, ones that would allow private companies to cut deep into the North Woods. I had maps, species reports, safety violations. They ignored every one of them. He looked toward the door, his breath fogging. Then someone from forestry filed a false report that I was no longer mentally sound for service. They used my grief after your grandmother passed to push me out. Noah frowned. That's not fair. Walter gave a dry chuckle. No, but it's common. He stepped outside, eyes scanning the tree line. That cabin, it's not on any official map. I know, I've checked them all, but it's here right where the old Firebreak Road used to run. Kodiak stood just outside the door, Tau's still body alert. He faced east ears, twitching. Something had caught his attention. Walter followed his gaze. They're still using this area, and they don't want anyone finding out. Back at home, Lisa stood at the kitchen sink rinsing a thermos under hot water. Through the frosted window she could see nothing but the white blur of snow and fence posts. She dried her hands and walked to the hallway, pausing outside Noah's room. Empty. The boots were gone and Walter's heavy coat was missing from the rack. She exhaled, lips pursed. She picked up the cordless phone and dialed. At the sheriff's office, Mason Reeves was reviewing the latest wildlife camera footage, a grainy still from a motion-triggered sensor caught near the East Trail. It showed a figure wrapped in thick layers carrying what looked like a large pack and moving south. No face. No identifying features. The phone on his desk rang. He answered with a grunt. Reeves. Sheriff Lisa's voice came clear. Noah and Walter are out. I think they've gone into the forest. They didn't say, but I have a feeling. Mason's voice shifted from casual to focused. Toward the North Ridge. Probably. He stood. I'll look into it. You did right calling me. In the woods, Walter knelt beside a patch of disturbed snow. Look at this. Noah moved closer. That's Kodiak's blood, he said. Older than yesterday, but not from today. Noah blinked. How do you know it's his? Walter pointed to a single tan hair clinging to a splinter in the wood. Because I know how this dog sheds. Kodiak moved in a slow circle, nose low. Suddenly, he stopped. Paw lifted, eyes locked on a nearby tree. Then he barked. Once. Sharp. From the tree's base, a long piece of rope trailed like a dead snake half buried in the snow. Noah knelt and tugged it free. A loop. A knot. A stake once driven deep. They tied him. Here, he whispered. Walter's face darkened, like bait. Noah looked up, but for who the wind had begun to rise again. Kodiak stood beside Noah, his side brushing the boy's shoulder, his eyes still watching something none of them could see. The afternoon sun hung low over Silver Pines, casting amber shafts of light across the Carter property. The snow had crusted and softened in patches, making a faint crunch underfoot. In the backyard near the old shed, Noah crouched beside Kodiak, tossing a weathered rubber ball across the snow-packed ground. Kodiak, strong and focused, despite his healing scars, bolted forward with a sudden burst of energy and snagged it in midair, landing gracefully before circling back. Noah laughed, truly. Laughed for the first time in months, the sound bouncing gently between the pines. What he didn't see, what neither of them noticed at first, was the shape crouched beyond the property's rear fence, half hidden behind a grove of spruce trees. A man wrapped in a camouflaged winter coat and heavy boots watched them with unmoving intensity. His face was partially obscured by a dark wool scarf pulled up over his nose, and his eyes were the only thing visible, narrow, calculating. He clutched something in his gloved hands, a small black camera with a cracked lens. As Noah threw the ball again, Kodiak stopped short this time. His body stiffened, his ears perked sharply forward. He turned low to the ground and let out a growl, not loud, but guttural and clear. Noah froze. What is it, boy? Kodiak stepped in front of him, teeth barely bared, eyes locked on the trees. Then he barked one sharp, violent burst that shattered the still air. The figure ducked and bolted. Kodiak launched after him, dragging snow behind his powerful frame. "Kodiak, wait!" Noah shouted. But the man was fast and knew the terrain. He disappeared into the trees, slipping down the incline behind the property fence. Kodiak stopped at the tree line, sniffed furiously, and circled. He didn't chase further, but he returned with something in his mouth, a piece of cloth. Noah met him halfway, heart pounding. "What is that?" He took the cloth gently, his gloved hands trembling. It was a scarf, or maybe part of a bandana, rough material. Dark green, with a faint emblem stamped in faded ink, an axe crossing a pine tree. Faint letters beneath read, "Ironwood Collective." That night at the dinner table, the scarf lay folded beside Walter's plate. The old man examined it under the lamplight with furrowed brows. "I haven't seen this in a long time," he murmured. Lisa, still in her pale blue scrubs, sat across from him with her arms crossed. "What is it?" Walter looked up. "It's a symbol from a group of illegal loggers that used to operate deep in the Rockies Ironwood Collective, rogue contractors, unlicensed, unregulated. They cut through protected zones and sold timber under fake paperwork." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "I thought they were arrested." "They vanished," Walter said. "We chased them for months. They worked fast and left no trace. Most of us believed someone was tipping them off." Kodiak lay under the table, silent and alert. He hadn't left Noah's side all evening. Lisa stood to rinse her plate, then paused. "There's more?" Walter looked up. "What do you mean?" Lisa disappeared into her bedroom and returned with a small envelope. She dropped it gently onto the table. Noah recognized the envelope immediately. It had arrived in the mailbox that morning, but his mother hadn't said a word. Walter picked it up and slid the contents free. One piece of paper. No address, no signature. Just a single line typed in bold black letters, "Keep your son out of what doesn't concern him." The room fell into silence. Lisa's voice was tight. "Someone knows we're asking questions, knows about Kodiak, maybe even knows we found that cabin." Walter folded the paper slowly. "We're not backing off." Lisa turned sharply. "This is my son we're talking about, and it was your husband who died trying to protect this forest." Walter replied calmly. "Whatever Kodiak was involved in, it's not over." Lisa stared at him, her lips pressed into a hard line, then turned to Noah. "You're staying inside for a few days. No more running off into the woods. But, Noah," she cut in, "I'm not losing you too." Noah looked down. Kodiak nudged his hand gently. Later that night, Walter sat by the window in his study, the scarf laid out on the desk beside a faded topo map from his ranger days. He traced a gloved finger across the terrain over ridgelines and creeks, stopping at a small, unmarked square. "I know where they're hiding," he muttered. Meanwhile, across town at the sheriff's station, Sheriff Mason Reeves paced his office. He had received a quiet phone call earlier from Lisa explaining what had happened and asking if he knew anything about the symbol. Mason had gone very still at the mention of Ironwood. Mason was in his early 60s, built like the mountains around him, broad-weathered, steady. His steel-gray eyes had seen the worst of both men and wilderness. He wore a worn leather holster over his shoulder, and his office smelled faintly of cedar and old coffee. He opened a drawer and pulled out a file from years past. Inside, grainy surveillance photos, typed reports, and one confiscated patch from the Ironwood group. It matched the cloth Lisa had described. He muttered, "Why now?" and circled the word "Echo" on the bottom of a page. The next morning, Kodiak was restless. He paced the shed, nose twitching as if catching the memory of something. Noah, still shaken from the day before, sat in the corner with a flashlight and the old field journal. As the wind picked up again, the beams of sunlight cast moving shadows across the walls. Then he noticed it tucked into the back of the journal, a folded piece of map paper. It was drawn in David Carter's handwriting, a root, a symbol that matched the scarf, and beneath it written in his father's familiar script, "Echo Unit Rendezvous Fallback, do not share." Noah looked up. "You knew," he whispered. "Dad, you knew about all of this?" Kodiak moved to his side ears, pricking forward as if waiting for what came next. The snow had thickened overnight, blanketing the pines with an eerie stillness that settled over Silver Pines like a held breath. Inside the sheriff's station, fluorescent lights buzzed above weathered file cabinets and bulletin boards littered with grainy photos. Sheriff Mason Reeves leaned over his desk. Hands braced on either side of a topographic map, a frown etched deep between his brows. Across from him stood Walter Carter, hat in hand, his heavy flannel jacket dusted with melting snow. Lisa sat beside him, her jaw tight, coat still zipped to her throat, and, in the corner, Kodiak sat upright and silent, amber eyes alert, as if he too were processing what lay ahead. "This cabin you found," Reeves said, his voice gravelly. "It matches a structure from an old ranger route decommissioned in '98. It's not on any civilian map and certainly not on current patrols." Walter nodded, which means someone wanted it that way. Reeves leaned back. In his early 60s, he was built like a retired linebacker, thick neck, square shoulders, and short-cropped, steel-gray hair. His uniform bore the scuff marks of decades in the field, and his hands looked like they could still split firewood without flinching. His loyalty to the town was unquestioned, but the truth now gnawed at him. "I pulled permit records," he continued. "Land access logs, maintenance authorizations. Turns out there's a set of recent entries with my signature." Lisa leaned forward. "But you didn't sign them." "No," Reeves said grimly, "I didn't." He opened a folder and slid it across the table. Inside was a photocopy of an authorization document, Forest Access, signed 3 months ago. The signature looked perfect, until you looked closer. Walter's eyes narrowed. "That's a forgery. And not just any forgery," Reeves said. "Look here." He pointed to the name just below the signature line, "Eric Boone, Deputy Chief." Lisa blinked. "Boone, he's always been decent. I've seen him deliver food to elderly shut-ins." "Exactly," Walter muttered. "The best place to hide a bad man is behind a good mask." Boone had served as deputy for nearly 8 years. A man in his late 40s, tall and clean-shaven, with neat brown hair and a reputation for calm efficiency. Always polite, always on time, but never too visible. "Do we confront him?" Lisa asked. "Not yet," Reeves said. "We need something stronger than suspicion." Noah arrived minutes later, Kodiak following close. The boy held something wrapped in a weatherproof cloth, his eyes serious. He laid it on the table, unwrapping it carefully. Inside, a compact field recorder, scratched but intact, with a tiny red indicator light blinking faintly. "I think this still works," he said. "We found it buried beneath the old oak. The one Dad used to say could survive lightning." Reeves leaned forward. "What's on it?" Walter pulled out a small speaker and jack from his coat pocket. They connected the recorder. Static filled the air, then a soft clicking. Then a voice, low, angry, muffled like it came through gritted teeth. "If that dog shows up again, you deal with it. I don't care if it's chipped, trained, or blessed by God himself. He opens his mouth, we lose everything." Another voice responded nervously. "What if someone finds the cabin? Then we torch it. And if Carter's kid gets nosy, remind his mother what happened to her husband." Lisa's face went pale. "That's Boone." Reeves exhaled. "Now we have something." By afternoon, the sheriff had discreetly organized a plan. Boone wouldn't know they were onto him. The plan was simple: plant bait, monitor the reaction, and wait. That night, Walter and Reeves returned to the cabin site with a hidden wildlife camera and a decoy document, a forged map suggesting new patrol schedules. They left it in plain view inside the cabin and waited. Meanwhile, Lisa stayed home, eyes glued to the front window, the envelope still folded in her pocket. At the same time, Kodiak grew restless again. Noah, sensing the shift in the dog's mood, offered him the leash, but the dog refused. Instead, Kodiak nosed at Noah's coat and trotted toward the back of the barn. Noah followed. There, nestled beneath a pile of old crates, Kodiak began to dig. A moment later, Noah helped pull free a second, smaller recorder, this one wrapped in plastic and twine almost professionally hidden. Back inside, they replayed it. Boone's afraid Carter's dog might remember something. He said the animal recognized one of the cutters, tried to bite through a fence line last spring. If that mutt gets anywhere near Echo's files, we're burned. Walter's hands curled into fists. He's known for months. The final nail came just before dawn. The hidden camera caught a figure entering the cabin, removing the decoy map and making a phone call. His face turned briefly toward the lens. Eric Boone. By sunrise, the trap had closed. At the sheriff's station, Boone arrived as usual, dressed in his dark green uniform badge, polished hair combed back. He nodded to the receptionist and made his way toward Reeves's office. He didn't notice the two deputies waiting in the hallway or Kodiak sitting calmly at Lisa's side. When the door shut behind him, Reeves played the audio file. Boone's face went still, his jaw locked. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," he said softly. "No?" Reeves said, "But I know what you are." He motioned to the deputies. They stepped forward. Boone didn't fight. Back home, Noah stood beside the lightning-split oak Kodiak lying at his feet, calm once more. Walter stepped up beside them. "Your dad would have been proud." Noah didn't answer. He just looked out over the woods, eyes sharp. The storm rolled in just after dusk, sweeping over the mountains like a silent tide, blotting out the stars and softening the forest with a thick curtain of snow. Inside the Carter shed, the wind howled against the wooden slats as Noah sat cross-legged on the sleeping bag, Kodiak at his side. The boy's eyes flicked toward the small lantern they'd set on the shelf, its warm light casting long shadows against the old field gear. There was a tension in the air, coiled like a spring. Walter entered with 2 thermoses in hand, his steps measured. "Lisa said you haven't eaten. Thought some stew might change your mind." He handed one to Noah, who accepted it wordlessly. Walter looked tired, his flannel coat dusted with snow lines on his weathered face deeper than usual. His right hand flexed unconsciously a tell Noah recognized now as unease. "Are you sure he'll come?" Noah asked. Walter's eyes met his. "He has to. He knows we know. And if there's one thing men like Boone fear, it's losing control." They didn't wait long. Just past 9 headlights flashed through the tree line, subtle, low beams masked by falling snow. A dark SUV pulled onto the Carter property, its engine quieting before the door opened. Eric Boone stepped out, moving with casual purpose. He wore a long black coat over his uniform, his badge gleaming under his collar. He held a flashlight in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Boone was in his late 40s, clean-cut and broad-shouldered, with a naturally stern expression that people mistook for discipline. Tonight, though, his eyes were sharp, calculating. His mouth twitched into a smile as he approached the shed. Evening, he called, knocking once on the frame. "Heard the sheriff's been nosing around. Thought I'd check in safety inspection, you understand." Walter opened the door slowly, standing in the entrance. "Funny time for one." Boone shrugged. "Storm's coming. Best to be thorough." Inside, Kodiak rose. His body went rigid, tail still hackles low. Boone froze mid-step, eyes narrowing. "Still, haven't put him down, huh?" Noah felt his stomach twist. He looked toward the corner where a backpack had been carefully placed inside it, a copy of the fake map, the audio files, and the scarf fragment. Walter stepped aside. "Be my guest." Boone entered cautiously, sweeping the flashlight across the interior. His gaze lingered on Noah, then Kodiak, then the pack. "You've been busy." Walter folded his arms. "You could say that." Without warning, Boone lunged for the bag, but he wasn't fast enough. Kodiak leapt, his body a blur of motion, teeth bared in a silent snarl. He hit Boone, center mass, knocking him backward into the wall. The flashlight clattered to the floor. Boone struggled, his arm flailing, trying to reach for something inside his coat, but Kodiak was already on top of him. His jaws locked around the man's forearm, pinning him with terrifying precision. Noah jumped to his feet, backing away. "Kodiak, hold Walter," said sharply. Kodiak didn't bite deeper. He held steady as stone, his eyes locked on Boone's face. Then the shed door burst open. Sheriff Mason Reeves stepped inside, his service pistol drawn and steady. "Deputy Boone," he said coldly, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and unlawful surveillance." Boone didn't answer. He just stared up, breathing hard, the edges of his calm cracking. Reeves nodded once. "Walter, help me cuff him." Walter handed over the cuffs from his belt. As they restrained Boone, Kodiak released him on command and returned to Noah's side, tail low but steady. Boone chuckled bitterly. "You think you've stopped anything, you haven't scratched the surface." "Then start digging," Reeves said. or you'll be buried right next to it. Later that evening, as snow began to drift against the windows of the sheriff's office, Boone sat in a holding cell silent. Reeves stood outside with Walter and Lisa reviewing the evidence. He named someone Reeves said, tried to offer a deal. Who? Lisa asked, her arms crossed tightly. Reeves hesitated. Mayor Branson. The room went still. Carl Branson had been the face of Silver Pines for over a decade. Mid-50s, always in tailored jackets and polished boots, his smile was a permanent fixture in every town ceremony. Charismatic, generous with community donations, and known for his booming laugh, Branson was the kind of man everyone trusted without question. Lisa whispered, "That's impossible." "No," Walter said quietly. "It makes sense. He signed the permits, pushed development faster than anyone, always had an excuse for every oversight." Reeves nodded. "Boone claims he was just a messenger," said Branson funded everything. Clearing protected zones, paying off enforcement, burying evidence. And when your husband started asking questions, Lisa closed her eyes. They made it look like an accident. In a quiet room down the hall, Noah sat at a table with the sheriff's assistant, a young woman named Dana Fields. Dana was in her late 20s with short blonde hair tucked under a wool beanie, warm brown eyes, and a calm, patient manner. She had grown up in Silver Pines and returned after college quietly efficient and often overlooked by most in town. But tonight, she sat beside Noah with the kind of focus that mattered. "You're very brave," she said gently. Noah shook his head. "I didn't do anything." "You did?" Dana replied. "You saw what adults didn't, and you spoke up." Noah looked down. "I was scared. Courage isn't not being scared," she said. "It's what you do when you are." He didn't answer. Instead, he opened his backpack and handed her the audio recorder. "There's more, in case you need it." She nodded. "We'll make sure it gets where it needs to go." Outside, the snow continued falling. Kodiak sat beside the sheriff's cruiser watching the town square where Christmas lights flickered faintly through the white haze. Walter joined him a moment later, setting a thermos on the hood. "You did good today," he said, reaching down to scratch behind the dog's ears. Kodiak looked up, eyes steady. "Your work's not over," Walter added. "But I think you just made it mean something again." The sun returned to Silver Pines 3 days after Boone's arrest, melting the jagged edges of snow from the rooftops and sending soft rivulets trickling down the trunks of long slumbering trees. The sky, once dulled by storm, now stretched in a bold winter blue over the mountains. In the center of town, the community hall had been cleared and decorated with pine boughs, flapping flags, and folding chairs that filled quickly as word of the event spread. Noah stood near the back entrance, tugging nervously at the sleeves of his sweater. He wore dark jeans, boots dusted clean, and the flannel shirt his father had given him the Christmas before he died. His hair was neatly combed, though one stubborn cowlick had refused to stay down. Beside him, Kodiak sat perfectly still, wearing a new navy blue harness that bore a freshly stitched badge, K9, Echo Unit. Lisa crouched behind them, her hand on Noah's shoulder. She wore a navy peacoat and a gray wool scarf. Her face, though tired, carried the first true ease it had known in months. The shadows of grief hadn't vanished, but they had softened. Her voice was warm, but quiet. "You ready?" Noah nodded. "I think Kodiak is." Lisa smiled. "Then so are you." The crowd settled as Sheriff Mason Reeves stepped onto the makeshift stage microphone in hand. "Good morning, Silver Pines." He wore his formal uniform, medals gleaming, shoulders squared. The hush that fell over the room wasn't out of obligation, but respect. "We've come together today not only to recognize bravery," he said, "but to rebuild something we didn't even know we'd lost trust." He gestured toward the front row where Walter Carter sat in his dark ranger's coat, his silver hair neatly combed back. This man once stood alone against a tide of corruption. Now he stands with us as the first official advisor to the newly reinstated Echo K9 task force. Applause broke out, and Walter nodded, once the closest thing to a smile touching his lips. Reeves continued. Lisa Carter, mother nurse and advocate, refused to back down even when threatened. She reminded this town that justice doesn't always wear a badge. Lisa stood briefly acknowledging the cheers before easing back into her seat with a deep breath. And finally, Reeves said, his tone shifting, "We come to a story that started not with a case file, but with a boy. A boy who followed a bark into the snow and found a soldier buried in silence." All eyes turned to Noah. The sheriff beckoned him forward, and Noah stepped onto the stage, Kodiak walking beside him in perfect sync. The room watched quiet and still as the boy and dog took center stage. Reeves knelt and opened a black velvet box. Inside was a silver medallion etched with a star and paw print. "Sergeant Kodiak, formerly of Echo Unit, we welcome you home." He fastened the medal to the dog's harness. Kodiak remained motionless except for a soft blink as if he understood. Reeves rose. "And to Noah Carter, first civilian youth to be accepted into our K-9 Junior Training Division, thank you for your courage. May your bond with this dog inspire others as it has inspired us." The crowd erupted. After the ceremony, the townspeople gathered in small clusters. People Noah barely knew shook his hand or ruffled his hair, but it wasn't overwhelming because Kodiak never left his side steady and grounding, a tether in the crowd. Walter stood with Sheriff Reeves near the back of the room, speaking with two men in dark suits. One of them was Agent Paul Denning, a federal wildlife investigator, tall and broad-shouldered, with closely cropped red-blonde hair and a slight stoop from years in the field. Denning's voice was low and confident as he reviewed the transfer papers that would bring oversight to Silver Pine's forest permits moving forward. As the crowd thinned, Dana Fields approached Noah with a laminated card and a patch. "This is for you," she said, her tone warm. "Your official Junior K-9 trainee badge." Noah turned it over in his hand, eyes wide. "Does this mean I get to help with real work?" Dana laughed. "One step at a time. But you'll be in uniform." Kodiak licked her hand once in approval. By late afternoon, the Carter family returned home, driving past the cabin, past the trees where Noah had once heard a broken bark in the snow. Everything looked different now, not because the place had changed, but because they had. Walter pulled the truck into the clearing behind the house. "Go on," he said, nodding toward the ridge. Noah stepped out, Kodiak beside him, and climbed the small hill near the old oak tree. Snow still lined the edges of the slope, but it had begun to melt in patches, revealing brown needles and soft ground beneath. They sat together, boy and dog, overlooking the valley of silver pines as light spilled through the gaps in the clouds, turning the tree line gold. Kodiak rested his head against Noah's side ears, twitching at the faint call of a crow in the distance. This used to be the saddest place, Noah whispered, where everything felt gone. He ran a hand down Kodiak's back fingers, brushing the metal. But now it feels like the start of something. The wind picked up gently, carrying with it the scents of pine bark and earth. Kodiak raised his head slightly and stared into the horizon. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He just watched, guarding the boy beside him. Sometimes the ones who are lost bring us back to where we're meant to be. A wounded dog, a broken boy, an old man who still believed. In a world filled with noise and doubt, this story reminds us that miracles don't always come with thunder or light. They come quietly in the form of loyalty, courage, and love. Perhaps it wasn't just fate that led Kodiak to Noah, but the hand of God placing each of them in the right place at the right time. And maybe, just maybe, the same grace is working in your life too right now in ways you can't yet see. If you believe that hope can rise from the snow, that no bond is ever too broken to heal, and that God still works through the faithful and the brave, share this story. Leave a comment if it touched your heart, and if you believe in second chances, hit that subscribe button to follow more true stories of love, redemption, and the incredible creatures who walk beside us. May God bless you and everyone you hold dear. If this story moved you, type Amen in the comments and let the world know that light always finds a way.